What's going on, everybody? Cleepus Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, I'm going to be giving you my first impressions of the Samsung Galaxy A14. Now, keep in mind, this is the 4G LTE version of the phone, not the Samsung Galaxy A14 5G. That is a completely different device. In addition to this, keep in mind, as of the recording of this video, I'm sure this will change in the future, but as of right now, the A14 LTE is not officially launched in the US, so if and when it does make it to US carriers, some specs like the storage and RAM, for example, might be a bit different. Now, if you do end up wanting to learn more about this phone, be sure to check out the description, where I will be linking to several other videos about it as I make them, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But without further ado, let's get into it. Now, before we actually get into the phone itself, let's take a quick look at the box. So there's really not a whole lot in here, but essentially, we got a SIM card removal tool. Then inside this packet, we got a quick start guide and a double-sided USB-C cable. Now, moving on to the phone itself, with the Samsung Galaxy A14, we're getting a 6.6-inch PLS LCD display with a 1080p resolution, a PPI of 400, and a 20:9 aspect ratio. So definitely a nice display here. At 6.6 inches, it's definitely on the larger side, so if you're going to be on your phone a bit more doing stuff like reading, for example, where you might want things to be a bit larger and easier to see, this phone will be great for that. And in general, if you're just consuming any kind of content, you will get a pretty good experience here, especially considering with the 20:9 aspect ratio, we're getting a pretty tall and narrow form factor. So if you're in landscape mode doing something like watching videos or looking at photos, you're going to get a nicer, more immersive experience, and things are going to look real cinematic in general. And in addition to being decently large and having a pretty nice form factor, with the 1080p resolution, the image quality is real good too. We got a nice, sharp, crisp image. The colors look pretty good. So in general, whether you're doing something more simple like reading, or maybe you're watching videos or playing games where the image quality might be a bit more important, regardless, if you're looking for a phone that has a nice display, you won't go wrong with the A14. Now for storage, with the Samsung Galaxy A14, we're getting 128GB of internal storage with microSD card expansion. But again, keep in mind, first of all, there is another variant that has 64. And second of all, when this phone does eventually reach the US, I seriously doubt the US version is going to have 128GB. It's probably going to have maybe 64, if not 32, because keep in mind, while the 5G version of this phone at least has 64, when it comes to lower end 4G phones like this, they tend to have a bit less storage. So while again, this phone in my hand does have 128GB, which is definitely a ton of storage for a phone like this, depending on the version you get, you might end up having less. Now for security features, with the Samsung Galaxy A14, like pretty much every A-series phone, this phone does have both face unlock and a fingerprint scanner, which in the case of this phone, is right here in the power key. But let's give it a try. There we go, one more time. And there we go. So real fast and responsive, no issues at all. And definitely nice that we get face unlock too. Having multiple options to unlock the phone besides a pin is always good. So if you want to use that instead, you always can. Now for the camera setup here, with the Samsung Galaxy A14, up front, we got a typical water drop notch for the selfie camera. Would have been nice to have a hole punch design instead, but considering most Samsung Galaxy A-series phones in this price range have pretty much the same design, not really surprising. This camera is 13 megapixels. Then on the back, we got a triple camera setup with a 50 megapixel main camera, a 5 megapixel ultra wide camera, and a 2 megapixel macro camera. Interesting thing here, the Samsung Galaxy A14 5G actually doesn't have an ultra wide camera, but looks like this one does, which is actually pretty similar to last year's generation, where the Samsung Galaxy A13 5G didn't have an ultra wide camera either, but the A13 4G did. So I honestly don't really know why Samsung does this, but regardless, I am glad to see this phone does at least have an ultra wide camera, and a macro camera too for that matter. Pretty much the same camera setup design at least as the Samsung Galaxy A54 5G and the A34 5G. I don't know if it's actually as good, I kinda doubt it, but in general, I definitely do appreciate getting both an ultra-wide camera and a macro camera, and considering there's no depth sensing camera, I'm assuming the hardware is at least good enough to use portrait mode without one, so just going off that, although I haven't actually used the camera yet, I am expecting the photo quality with this phone to be pretty good. And then for video, like you probably would expect, with the Samsung Galaxy A14, we are getting a max recording quality of 1080p in both the rear and front cameras, so no 4K here. Now when it comes to RAM and processor, with the Samsung Galaxy A14, we're getting 4GB of RAM with the MediaTek Helio G80 processor. Now again, keep in mind, depending on the version of this phone you get, maybe you're watching this video a few months after this recording, and the phone is in the US now and you have the US version, the RAM and processor might be slightly different. Now, I don't imagine the US version of this phone is going to have like 6GB of RAM, and I seriously doubt any phone at this point is going to have less, or at least not this phone specifically, but the processor might be some sort of Exynos processor or something like that. So again, just keep in mind, depending on which version of this phone you get, the specs might be slightly different, but I imagine the performance is pretty much going to be the same no matter what. But again, the processor with this phone is the MediaTek Helio G80. Now in my experience, the phone is definitely not fast by any means. Remember, this is a really entry-level 4G phone, so you can really only expect so much, but in general, it's definitely not the slowest phone in the world, and compared to other phones like it, like the Motorola Moto G Play 2023 for example, which I want to say is pretty much Motorola's direct counterpart to this, I would say the A14's performance is a little bit better, and for more basic activities, things run decently well. So on one hand, if you're really going to be on your phone a lot, yeah, you are gonna probably get some slowdowns here and there. And if you're someone who typically does more demanding activities, then yeah, you are definitely gonna wanna get something quite a bit faster. But for more basic, occasional use, the A14 will at least get the job done. Now, I did run a benchmark test on this phone using Geekbench 6, and here are the results I got. So what I recommend doing is running this test on your current phone, and then comparing your results to these. And that's gonna give you a better idea of where this phone stands performance-wise compared to your current device. Because depending on what you have, it may or may not actually be a performance upgrade. But I will say, compared to the Samsung Galaxy A13, or even the A13 5G for that matter, the performance on this phone is actually pretty decent. It's quite a bit faster than the A13 4G. Even for a lower end device, that was definitely a slow phone. And yeah, even compared to the Samsung Galaxy A13 5G, I feel like that phone was slow for a 5G phone. And while the A14 LTE is not faster than that, it's around the same kind of level. So again, in general, if you're doing more basic activities and you're not really going to be doing a ton on your phone, I do think the A14 will at least get the job done. But again, if you are going to be on your phone a bit more, especially doing more demanding activities, you are going to want to spend a bit more and get something faster. Now for the battery, like pretty much every A-series phone, the Samsung Galaxy A14 has the standard 5000 mAh battery, and it also supports 15-watt fast charging, so definitely a great battery here. The charging speed in my experience, despite only technically being 15 watts, is actually pretty good, so most people won't have any problems with that. And of course, with a 5000 mAh battery, you can expect to get some great battery life and longevity, so if the battery is important to you, you're definitely not going to go wrong with this phone. For the software, the A14, like pretty much every Samsung phone now, does have Android 13, and in addition to this, keep in mind, Samsung really has some of the best software support, so with this phone you can also expect to get several other major updates in the future. I believe it will be getting Android 14, 15, 16, and 17, so if you like to keep your phone for a longer time without having to replace it, then this is definitely going to be a great thing for you. But as far as other features go, unfortunately, this phone really doesn't have a whole lot. It doesn't have NFC, so if you like to use tap and pay, you will have to get something else, but honestly, the Samsung Galaxy A14 5G does have NFC, so if you really do want that feature, you could just get that, and it's pretty similar to this in a lot of ways. But if you're not really concerned about using tap and pay, then of course, this is not going to be a big deal. But in conclusion, my overall first impressions of the Samsung Galaxy A14. In general, I feel like this phone is almost a carbon copy of the A14 5G, except of course it's not a 5G phone, and it does have a much slower processor, but on the other hand, it does have an ultra-wide camera, which I do think is kind of cool. So in general, if you're really looking for a super entry-level basic device that has a nice display for maybe watching YouTube videos, and has a really good camera setup and a larger battery, but you don't really need to do a whole lot with it, you don't really care about the performance, and you don't need features like NFC, really just something basic that gets the job done for normal everyday activities. In that case, while this phone may not be the best option for everyone, it definitely is at least worth considering. Now again, if you do want to learn more about this phone, definitely check out the description, where I will be linking to several other videos about it, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow Kalipis Tech on Twitter and Instagram. And as always, I will see you in the next video.